Hey guys, this is Lawrence of the Ketones and Coffee Podcast. Make sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss out on any of this great content. Hey guys, this is Lawrence. So welcome back to the Ketones and Coffee Podcast, and thank you so much for tuning in. I know everyone here that's listening are here because you want to create a sustainable, healthy lifestyle through the ketogenic diet, and every single week I try to bring in guests that not only has the knowledge, but these individuals has also been through the same trials that we all have been through when it comes down to our search for a better health. We get together in hopes to assist you on your own journey. Hey guys, stick around because our guest today is a natural ketogenic bodybuilder. He is the CEO and founder of Keto Savage, a health and fitness company which offers coaching, training, and nutrition for athletes and bodybuilders. He is also the CEO and founder of Keto Break, a ketogenic meal replacement bar for efficient nutrition, only with the highest quality ingredients. And until recently published his own book titled Ketogenic Bodybuilding, a natural athlete's guide to competitive savagery. I'm so excited for this. I am here with Robert Sikes, or better known as Keto Savage. Robert, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to rock and roll with you, brother.
Awesome, man. What an incredible journey, your drive, to do what you do and also have the time to share this to others. I'm sure this has created a whole movement of healing within the bodybuilding community. It's an honor, man. Love to have you on.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, the bodybuilding community they're probably always going to be the last to adopt a ketogenic diet, but anything I can do to kind of push people in that direction is going to be worthwhile for sure.
You talked about in your book that bodybuilding has incredibly bad rep as a sport in general because people can't help themselves, but generalize everyone, of course. They may say it's an ego-driven sport, performance-enhancing drugs, etc. You, on the other hand, is a ketogenic bodybuilder, definitely an outlier amongst your peers. Let's talk about this journey, a bodybuilder's journey specifically. The attitude, the mindset you have to have, and the love you have to have for the sport. We'll get into the relationship with food in a second, but I believe it starts with cultivating that right mindset first. No better person to speak to or speak on it than an elite athlete like yourself. You had accomplished so many things in your very young career in bodybuilding. Where did your passion for bodybuilding come from? Did all of that come natural to you? Were your parents athletes? I just want to try and understand, how did you harness that? When did you realize that you can compete at the highest level as well?
Yeah, I mean, my parents were definitely not athletes. I mean, my folks are very like they're in good shape. Like they work a lot. They're physically active people, but definitely not bodybuilders. Definitely not athletes. And common sense the word. My uncle actually got me into bodybuilding. He was a football player. He was had a lot more muscle, and he had a really outgoing atmosphere and vibe. I kind of wanted to emulate that. So he took me under his wing, showed me how to do a bicep curl, and the rest was history, man. I just got stoked. I got addicted to it. And I just started falling in love with the sport of bodybuilding. At the time, I lived out in the country. I didn't have any access to a gym. So I started, using a bunch of pieces of steel that I had laying around the house, using my, equipment that my dad had in his barn. And we were, kind of fashioned some gym equipment out of that. But very rudimentary, upbringing as far as the bodybuilding goes, but fell in love with the sport nonetheless. And I was just amazed at how with bodybuilding, with other sports, it's like team sports, for instance, you are really dependent upon the drive and the discipline of everybody else on the team, which is good in its own right for sure. But with bodybuilding, it's, you make or break, yourself and your outcome based off of the work that you put in. Like it's all dependent upon you. And that really resonated with me. So I just fell in love with the whole nature of bodybuilding, the aspect of the discipline, the aspect of the consistency. And I was able to see the fruits of my labor as my physique continued to improve after, doing it for several years. So that was kind of where it all started. And I just have kept doing it since. And I've been bodybuilding now for about 13, 14 years, I guess.
Awesome, man. And whilst you're starting, what was your talking about the evolution of your diet, looking into diets? Um, when did you look at diets in a more serious, way, going into, competition? Because, growing up, obviously you have, your metabolism is, um, different from where you are now. So when did you started really looking into nutrition?
So I was into nutrition pretty early on, but I was not into keto until only, about 7 years ago. So when I first started bodybuilding, since I didn't really know any bodybuilders, I was just turning to what I could find online, like on bodybuilding.com, what I could see in like the magazines and, the muscle and fitness magazines at the grocery stores. And everything on the magazines was basically saying pretty much like a bro diet, eating chicken, rice, broccoli, eating 6 or 7 meals a day, eating every 2 or 3 hours. So I tried to emulate that. And that's what I did for the first several years of my bodybuilding career. Then I got into flexible dieting, which is pretty popular amongst natural bodybuilders. And that's basically, an emphasis towards hitting macros, but it coming from whatever foods you really want, as long as you're hitting those macros. So I mean, you're kind of able to eat a variety of things. And that worked. I was able to get really lean. I got down, I don't know, to I think probably 4%, 5% body fat on my first show. So I got really lean. But then after that show was over, I developed a bunch of disordered eating tendencies. And that kind of led me down a really dark path that took years to recover from. And that's kind of when I fell into keto, because that was the only diet that really worked for me, that improved that relationship with food and was able to give me some clarity as to what I should and should not eat, and what my body responds well to.
I understand that you had changed your diet to low carb, which at that time you didn't know that you were doing the ketogenic diet, right?
Yeah. So when I started after my third show, that would have been like mid or early 2015. I started doing carbohydrate backloading because I just had such an unhealthy relationship with food at the time. So I was looking for a viable alternative for what I hadn't been doing. And carb backloading seemed like the ticket for me. And that's basically, keto during the day and then a bunch of high glycemic index carbs at night, which kind of worked well because I was doing a bunch of binging at the time. So it basically gave me free reign to binge, and it was seen in a positive light almost. So that's what I did. And then I realized that I felt better without the carbs. So I did carb backloading minus the carbs, which lo and behold, is pretty much a ketogenic diet. This was before keto was popularized. It was before there was any blogs or podcasts or books on the subject. But I realized that, that's what it was that I was doing that was working so well. And since then, like 2017, 2018, 2019, the ketogenic diet really grew in popularity, and it's pretty much blown up and has become pretty common household name now.
Yeah, I want to ask you this, just hypothetically. If you had continued with the other high carb diets, let's just say you weren't open to doing keto, or you didn't stumble upon, what you were doing, since you already developed a poor relationship with food at the time, where do you think that would have led you if you never found out about keto?
Man, I don't think anybody's ever asked me. That's a good question. I would probably be a lot fatter than I am now. Like I would probably be I'd probably continue that unhealthy relationship with food, man. Like that, I really, really struggled with that. Like I was binging, I was purging. It was just a very dark time in my life. And the only thing that really worked to break free of that was the ketogenic diet. And prior to that, I had done just about every diet under the sun. So I can't imagine anything having really worked as well as what keto did for me. So I'd probably still be struggling with some forms of disordered eating, maybe not to the extent that I did then, but probably still struggling with it to some degree. But I definitely I wouldn't have amassed the audience that I have now. I wouldn't have been able to add the value that I have now. And I just don't think I would be as well-rounded and as healthy a person as I am now, honestly.
When you discovered this, what was your attitude? Did you want to tell every soul, or was there fear of being criticized at a time where it really wasn't a thing yet?
Honestly, like I didn't know what to expect because there were no other, keto influencers that I was aware of back then. So what I was doing was pretty cutting edge, or at least it seemed like it was pretty cutting edge. So I just decided to do it. And then I wasn't speaking at that time from a place of authority because I didn't know if it was going to work. So I was just simply documenting my journey. And because I was just simply documenting my journey, I didn't feel like there was anything that could be taken negatively because I wasn't telling people how to do things. I was just simply showing how I was doing things. And by being just honest and open and transparent, that resonated with people. And started gaining some momentum.
What type of feedback are you getting from your peers back then? You are obviously an outlier then, and probably a disruptor of belief that carbs is essential to the sport. What was the type of reactions are you getting, like from different people, other walks of life, or in maybe even your peers?
Yeah, I mean, there was just disbelief, honestly. I mean, they didn't think that what I was doing was possible. I mean, like in the gym, like when I'd be working out and I'd tell people what I was doing, they gave me a bunch of flack. They said it's not going to work, it's not going to happen. And I heard a bunch of negative, a bunch of negativity for sure. But once I did my first show with a ketogenic diet, earned my pro card, and just looked freaking phenomenal, looked better than I ever had before. And that kind of shut the naysayers up. And then they started being more interested and more intrigued about what it is I was doing and how I could, how I was going about it, because they were compelled to follow suit.
Wow. And I want to know, like, what are the most common misconceptions about keto bodybuilding?
I mean, obviously the big ones, like you can't build muscle without carbs. You still hear that to some degree. That you can't get lean with that higher fat ratio. That you're not going to have you're not going to be able to fill out your muscles and have good muscle glycogen. That you're not going to have the endurance and the training intensity to go hard in the gym. All the things that people say are just impossible.
Did that change? Did that change now?
As far as like what people are saying?
Yeah.
To some extent, I feel like there's still a lot of bros out there that say you still can't, reach your full potential without carbs. But it's not just me anymore that's doing it. There's a lot of people. I've coached a lot of people that have since gone on to win their pro card with the ketogenic approach in bodybuilding. There's a whole bunch of ultra endurance runners that are doing keto. Powerlifters are doing keto. I mean, they're all sports now. So for anybody to say that you can't compete at an elite level without carbohydrates, I mean, there's a bunch of athletes out there proving otherwise. So just, open your eyes to that, I guess,
So mainly are they saying you can't compete because you need carbs?
Yeah. I mean, they definitely said that. They still say that to an extent, but I've got enough of a track record now and I've documented my journey detailed enough that anybody that says that I can't, I kind of just, have them look at prior pictures or look at my history, and that usually
fair enough.
That usually kind of like explains things enough.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
I'm obviously not a bodybuilder. This is a topic that only a few can talk about. So in ketogenic bodybuilding, what are the variables that you work with in terms of like hitting monthly goals? Maybe for your clients, it is still regimented, obviously, right? Doing meal preps and all that.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to be able to really get away from that in regards to the diet you follow. I mean, the more accuracy you can adhere to with regard to your prep, the more dialed in you'll likely become. So, I mean, there's still, I always encourage people to, prep their meals in advance, but you're only prepping, 1 or 2 meals as opposed to 6 or 7. So it's a much less cumbersome task. You're still going to, ideally want to weigh yourself on a regular basis, take measurements. The training's still hard. Like all that stuff is still pretty consistent. It's just a total shift in how you go about nutrition.
So what are your meals like preparing for a competition? Like samples of what meals look like for you?
So it's pretty, I mean, like ground beef and eggs is pretty much my base. And then I just kind of build off of that based off of what my macro goals are. But yeah, like when I start with a higher fat ratio, I'll start with like a 75-25 ground beef blend. And then as I'm increasing protein, dropping fat, I'll go to like an 80-20, then an 85-15. And then towards the end, as my protein starts to drop, I'll start returning back to that fattier ratio. But everything's always in a state of flux, but definitely using ground beef and eggs is kind of the underlying foundational foods makes meal prep pretty easy.
Okay, so talking about preparing for a competition, and if you can look back and compare your preparation for a competition, is there a major difference in time? Like if you compare now with keto and then with other types of diets, is it quicker to prepare now for you, or what's
So the fastest prep I had ever done was my first prep, and that was when I was eating carbohydrates, and I only gave myself 12 weeks for that one, and I lost 80 pounds in 12 weeks. I don't recommend that for anybody though. Like it was
Mhm.
too fast, too aggressive. I lost too much muscle. So now I pretty much do 4 to 6 months, depending on where I'm starting at. But usually for me, it winds up being about 5 months, which is a pretty long prep. But that's what a lot of natural bodybuilders do, regardless of the diet they follow. Because if you're dieting longer and more slowly, usually you can be more intentional about preserving the lean muscle mass you
Mm,
have. If you're doing a ton
yep.
of cardio and drastically dropping your calories, you're going to risk losing more muscle than is necessary.
What's an off season look like before? Like, is it going back to, binging, or because now obviously on a ketogenic diet, you're always on a ketogenic lifestyle, correct? But
Right.
before, you're always on a diet, on a short term diet. What's
Yeah.
the major difference there?
Yes. I mean, the main difference between a cutting phase and a building phase for me now is just simply the quantities of food that I'm consuming. In the past, when I was in a building phase, it was just eat everything in sight and eat as much of it as possible. And, I mean, I was eating just really poor quality foods and I would get a lot heavier in the off season. I'd put on a bunch of unnecessary body fat. Whereas now I eat the same food, just a little bit more of it, so that I'm in a
Mm.
caloric surplus to optimize for muscle building. But I'm definitely keeping the foods clean year round. No need to drastically change that. I don't do as much cardio in a building phase, but everything else is pretty much held constant.
How about energy? How do you compare?
Between keto and a carb
Yeah.
based prep, I mean,
Mm.
a lot more energy with keto, um, because, like you think about it, if I'm eating fat as my primary fuel source and I'm able to keep fat relatively high throughout the building phase and the cutting phase, I never really deplete my source of energy. My calories are lower, so my total energy coming in is lower, but I'm still getting a pretty good supply of it. In the past, carbs would be my energy source, and there would be times where carbs were minuscule and fats minuscule, and
Mm.
there's just not a lot of energy coming in. And I would keep protein sky high because everybody tells you have super high protein in a cut. But if your body's using protein to create energy, that's a very inefficient process. So it's not really very much bang for your buck, so to speak. So much more energy now with a ketogenic approach than what I was experiencing previously.
How about, would you say the keto preparation would be easier?
Yeah,
Would you say that far? Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be like what I find sustainable and ideal for me may look different than what somebody else finds to be sustainable and ideal. But I think there is a lot to be said for a ketogenic prep, especially from a hormonal standpoint. By having a
Mm.
relatively high dietary fat intake throughout the entire process, you're going to do a lot more to protect your hormones from down regulating as you are in a deeper calorie intake, or deficit rather. So I think that's been a big benefit for sure.
Mentally, mentally, when you're preparing now compared to then, is it you're are you obviously not no, I have no experience with preparing for a competition, but how are you mentally now? Where would you compare that? How would you compare that?
Yeah. So mentally, I mean, a prep is going to be hard no matter what diet you're following, but
Yep.
I have a lot more mental clarity in the later phases of a prep now with a ketogenic approach than I was before. I mean, a lot of people think of bodybuilders as being these zombies that walk around for the last several weeks of a competition. That's not too far from the truth. I mean, if you have
Mm.
very minimal calories coming in, your hormones are downregulated, your metabolic rates downregulated, and you get super high protein, very low fat, very low carbs, you're not really going to feel all that great. And I'm definitely more tired. My metabolism down regulates as well. Like that still happens with a ketogenic approach. But because my ketones are also much higher, ketones can cross the blood brain barrier. So my mental clarity and acuity seems to almost be heightened when I'm in the later phases of a
Mm.
prep as opposed to being totally in the tanks.
Mm. That's huge. That's huge, definitely. Um, what's the is there if you compare your competitions when you're on a ketogenic state already, what's one thing that you've learned from previous competition that helped you build more muscle on keto for your other competition, like on your first one on keto and then the next one? Is there something that you've done differently to build more muscle on keto?
Not so much because I mean I'd been bodybuilding, I'd been training to build muscle for several years prior to
Mm,
adopting a ketogenic diet. So there hasn't really been much that I've learned in regards to changes in how to build muscle on a ketogenic diet versus carbs. Because I mean, at the end of the day, the training that I do to build muscle is pretty similar between the two. And you're still going to want to be in a caloric surplus, whether you're doing keto or not, to optimize for building muscle. Honestly, the biggest thing for me is just more time as a bodybuilder in general, more perspective, more experience, more wisdom. So placing more significance on recovery, placing more significance on proper form and technique. I
mm.
mean, when I first started working out, I mean, I was ego lifting. I would do a bunch of half reps with squats with a lot of weight on the bar that wasn't with proper form. So now I'm just more experienced and I don't have any reason to ego lift because I don't care what
Mm.
people think. I just want to be the best that I can be. So I just focus on proper form and technique.
If someone prepping for a competition is not properly building muscle, what could they be doing wrong, or does that ever happen?
Yeah, I mean they could be eating too little in the building phase to not be at an
Mm.
adequate caloric surplus. They could also not be training hard enough, not implementing proper progressive overload principles. Because if they're just going through the motions, they're not giving their body reason to grow more muscle. It's likely to not grow any
Mm.
more muscle. So implementing progressive overload and really giving your body a stimulus that results in more growth is very, very important.
Let's get into coaching now. What have you found common with clients that found success in the ketogenic diet while prepping for a competition? What are the most common things that you've seen in your clients, that became successful on this diet?
I think a lot of people that do a ketogenic diet do so because they don't have a good relationship with carbohydrates. They can't
Mm,
moderate their carbohydrate intake. And I feel like when you remove that as an option and they follow more of an elimination as opposed to a moderation style approach, they tend to find that more sustainable. They tend to find more satiety. They tend to just perform better. They're more productive because they're not constantly fixated on food. So,
mm.
from a psychological standpoint, removing those trigger foods, removing those foods that are addictive in nature has been, really good for me and also my clients.
What I want to get into, a coaching process in the beginning. What can you talk a little bit about the first week of, a client? What do you recommend, or what do they do in the beginning to start the process?
Yeah. So the first thing that I was trying to do with my clients is establish what their true maintenance intake is. So if they've been tracking for quite some time, I jump on a call with all my clients. I message with them through Slack. I do a lot of communication with them. But first goal is always to figure out what their true maintenance intake is. And if they have been tracking, that makes it easier because, we've got all that data. We can kind of see how their body's been responding. If they haven't been, and then I get them set up tracking macros. I get them a meal plan. I figure out what their intake is. I have them usually eat intuitively for a few days to kind of see what they naturally gravitate to while tracking that intake. And then we can kind of establish if they would be better off with a reverse diet or if they need to go into a caloric deficit, or just kind of depending on what their goals are. But really establishing their starting position at the onset is very important. Figuring out what their composition is, figuring out what percentage of their body weight is fat mass versus lean mass, figuring out what their maintenance caloric intake is, figuring out what their level of familiarity with training, resistance training is, how they know how to use a certain equipment, if they do know how to use a certain equipment or not, but just kind of really establishing a good solid baseline.
So basically, just building their foundation and within the lifestyle and and also exercising too as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do they get most of out of your system? What's the mindset, or how do they get the most of it?
So to
Like in
get the
gym.
most
Mm,
of coaching with me, and honestly, probably this is going to hold true with any coach, but being open in their communication. Like if I've got macros that I've given them to hit, and I'm trying to figure out how their body responds to those macros, figure out how their energy is impacted, their sleep, all that stuff. Being open and transparent in that communication with me, so that I can get that feedback and then know how to adjust macros going forward is going to be key. But then
mm,
also actually hitting the macros. I mean, it amazes me how I've hired clients or clients have hired me in the past for my expertise. I'll give them a plan, and they'll argue with me, or they won't do the plan. Some people are just stubborn like that, I guess. So some people are just harder to work with. But being coachable, and
Right.
being open to suggestions is going to be, very, very important. And consistency. I mean, it's all like nothing that I do as a coach towards my clients is going to be like this, massively unique, like new technique that's revolutionizing. I mean, it's all, I guess it's kind of revolutionizing because I don't see too many bodybuilders going about it with my protocol. But at the end of the day, the quote unquote magic happens when you adhere to the plan. You are consistent, you are disciplined, you are dedicated, and that's going to hold true with any coaching client relationship, with anybody, with any sport.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you get into mindfulness at all with your clients?
Yeah. I mean, I've got a lot of clients. I mean, if you, especially with bodybuilding, my bodybuilding is a mental sport more so than a physical sport. So I always try and, have this long game approach towards, adopting the nutrition, the training, everything like that. Mindset around that, the day-to-day technique is very, very important. And sometimes they're in a dark place, so I jump on a call with them. I try and, stoke the flame to try and talk to them about where they're going, what the big picture is. But everybody, like the beautiful thing about bodybuilding, and honestly any really intensive training regimen or hardship or adversity, is that it forces you to become more self-aware. Like you learn more about yourself in the process. Some people like that, some people don't. Some people are scared to learn more about themselves. Some people are afraid to figure out what they're made of. But if they're able to go into it full speed ahead, they're able to learn so much about themselves and what they're capable of. And I feel like being part of that journey from a psychological standpoint is incredibly fulfilling for me as a coach.
What's included in your program? Can anyone join your program, like a couch to to competitions type of program, or if
Yeah, if you've
yeah.
never worked out and never, like if you're not athletic at all, you're probably not going to want to like say, okay, I'm going to step on a stage in 6 months. But anybody can work with me. I definitely specialize in natural bodybuilding and market myself accordingly, but the concepts hold true whether you're going to step on stage or not. So, I mean, anybody can work with me. I work with a very broad array of clientele. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you've never picked up a dumbbell in your life, you know, by all means, work with me. We can get you fixed up. We can get you set up on working out. We can go through that technique. We can work on proper form and function, but don't expect to be Arnold Schwarzenegger in 6 months.
Absolutely. Let's get into your book, Ketogenic Bodybuilding: A Natural Athlete's Guide to Competitive Savagery. What can you say about that title? What does that mean?
That sums up the book in its entirety, man. Like it's all about ketogenic bodybuilding, the protocol that I've developed myself and use with much success. And I'm a natural athlete, so I wrote the book in terms of being a natural athlete. I don't know that much about performance enhancing drugs because I've never gone that route. That can certainly change some things, but that's not my area of expertise. What is my area of expertise is optimizing one's composition, one's physique via a ketogenic diet with the intention of competing on stage and just honestly just improving composition, whether you step on stage or not. But that's my forte for sure.
What can they expect from this book?
So I wrote the book basically like if like coaching is expensive, hiring a prep coach is expensive. I wanted to write a book where people could buy the book, read the book, implement everything the book says, and then be pretty confident that they're going to be competitive on show day without a coach. Like if they just use the book as their coach. So they can save themselves a lot of money. Like I'm always going to say that there's a lot of benefit that comes with having a coach. Like I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a coach, but for the people that, don't want to go that route or honestly just want a good resource independent of having a coach, the book is going to be your go-to guide.
What is the process like writing this book? Because it really goes in depth into, how to get ready, and you had, a lot of people talk about your book. Most of them are within the keto community as well. And so what was the process like, and how long did it take this book like this to get published?
So I started writing the book during the start of my last prep, which was in November of 2019. And it was published on January 30th of 2022. So pretty lengthy time, over 2 years to write the book. But, for me, like these are all things that I've learned through trial and error. These are all things that I've implemented. These are all things that I've really kind of put into practice myself over the past 7 years as a ketogenic athlete. And then I guess the 7 years prior to that as a bodybuilder. So a lot of this is stuff that I just know innately, like deeply. And I don't really, I intentionally tried to avoid a bunch of, really wordy scientific studies and literature, because I don't want people's eyes to just glaze over as they're reading it. I want it to be very actionable, very easy to implement, and very straightforward. So the book is written pretty much as I speak. Like it's written as if I was talking to a client of mine. So that probably expedited the process. If I was to try and include a bunch of studies, that would make things even more drawn out. But still a lengthy process in its entirety. I mean, from conception to, writing to getting it published, like I said, it's over 2 years, but time well spent for sure. It was during the pandemic. So as everybody else was, not knowing what to do with their life, I was busy writing a book.
Blessing in disguise. Absolutely. Awesome, man. I'm gonna link everything down below so you guys can check that out. Check his book, Ketogenic Bodybuilding, a Natural Athlete's Guide to Competitive Savagery. Robert Sikes, thank you so much for coming on. Where can they find you and connect with you?
Hey, appreciate it, man. So Keto Savage is where they can find me. ketosavage.com on web, Keto Savage on Instagram and social. The book, I made a website specifically for the book. So ketogenicbodybuilding.com for that. There's a free download that people can access, which is basically the same spreadsheet that I use for my clients. So they can access that and use it if they like. The book's also on Amazon as well.
Awesome, man. Well, also Keto Break, I'd love to have it here in Canada. Is it available in Canada yet?
Yeah, so we ship worldwide. Shipping to Canada is a bit expensive. However, we just partnered up with a grocery store in Canada called Switch. I don't know if you're familiar with Switch, but yeah, so you can get it directly from Switch now, and they don't have the international shipping costs. So that's the way to go for sure.
Awesome. I didn't know Switch had it. Anyways, I'm gonna jump into it right after this call. But thank you so much, Robert Sikes, Keto Savage, once again, for telling your story. Get this book, guys. And thank you so much, Robert. Appreciate
hey, man, like I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to jump on your show and chat with you. If there's ever anything I can do for you, man, just let me know.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
See you, bud.